The Trump FDA has hired a new communications advisor. According to CBS News, the agency recently hired Nina Devlin to fill an agency position. Now, Devlin happened to be a former Mylan senior executive. Now, I'll get to that in a minute. Now, Devlin, who used to be head of global communications at Mylan, was reportedly hired on October 15th. Now, so the FDA is like, we need a communications person. We're going to reach out to the industry and take Mylan's communications director and put them into our administration. Not a problem, right? No, there's happens to be a couple of problems with that, at least in my opinion. For one, this is kind of what the swamp looks like. Remember, the Trump administration, they are the swamp. He wasn't going to drain the swamp, and I think that was fairly obvious to a lot of people from the get-go. But like I said, here's the swamp, here's another industry executive inside of a government agency, but it actually gets worse. Now, her hire comes roughly 2 months after Mylan had reached a $465 million settlement with the federal government stemming from a Justice Department claim that it overcharged the government for the EpiPen. Now, Mylan, of course, got in trouble for it seems like a long time ago, but it was actually just 2016 during the election of overcharging for EpiPens. Now, EpiPens are, they're a potentially life-saving medication. So all it is that it's a epinephrine, which costs like less than $1 to make, inside of a special injector that makes sure you get it injected into the right place. If it's not, it could potentially cause fatal reactions. And if you don't have the EpiPen, if you don't have that epinephrine in the right time, that could also cause fatal problems. So, oh boy. So it's kind of a necessary drug. Now, Mylan's like, yeah, we know it's necessary. You know what that means to us? Cha-ching. Here we go. We're going to go and overcharge the government. The government's going to pay. Because the government, has to put it in schools for people who have peanut allergies, for example. So they want to make sure that the schools are stocked. So they get into they buy this. I don't know if there's a contract involved in this, but they essentially buy these EpiPens from Mylan Pharmaceuticals and put them into the school. So because the government's a big customer, these guys are like, hey, let's overcharge the government. So they got in trouble for that and paid $465 million. Now, what's interesting is the company's like, well, we didn't actually overcharge them. We're not guilty of that, but we're going to settle anyway. They claim innocence. Okay, look, you can settle and be innocent. That's understandable, right? Now, I think in this case, even if Mylan had been innocent of, price gouging or overcharging, and say that was the case, if it went to trial, even the implication is terrible for PR, terrible for your brand. So I think as part of brand awareness, they would be like, well, we'll settle anyway. I don't think that they're innocent. I do think that they overcharged, but I'm just laying out the scenario of which they would settle anyway and still be innocent and the reasons why. But anyway, Mylan, of course, couldn't afford another PR disaster, especially after they got called out for jacking up the price of EpiPens to over $600 for a pack of 2. Now, that story, of course, made major headlines. I covered it here on the show. And there's a lot of people that were justifiably outraged. Now, the company, later on, they promised, okay, look, we're going to change that. We're going to figure out a way to lower the price or make some special deals. They ended up delivering nothing. It's still about $600 for a pack of EpiPens for most people. Though I do have to mention that there are a lot of manufacturers, drug manufacturers, that will say like, oh man, if you can't afford our product, well, that's okay. We'll give it for free to certain people. Fair enough. And I guess it's better that they get it through that than not at all. But still. Now, anyway, you might wonder why hire someone from Mylan? I mean, I get hiring from the industry, but I don't like it because of the revolving door, and let's be honest about that. And there's a reason that you're more likely to back things up that help your former employer, especially if they welcome you back to your company once your stint in government is up. But for Mylan, I guess that seems a little strange given how they just settled this suit for a large amount of money. I wonder if there could be any other reason. Oh, right. Mylan's CEO happens to be the daughter of a congressman. Oh, interesting. Now, that's Heather Bresch, Joe Manchin's daughter. But some of you might point out, rightly so, but wait a minute, Joe Manchin is a Democrat. Corporate Democrats especially love to harp on, hey man, well, look, he's a Democrat, but Bernie Sanders isn't, so maybe Bernie Sanders shouldn't criticize Joe Manchin. Ridiculous. Look what kind of Democrat Joe Manchin is. He's the most conservative Democrat in the country, and it's actually not been very critical of Trump, and has actually welcomed Trump's help when it comes to the opioid epidemic, and I'll mention that in a minute. So the person that the administration decided to hire for this post says she wants to go after the opioid addiction. Now, I actually do believe that because it is a problem. We've got an epidemic on our hands, so we should do something about it. And I welcome all the help, that anybody wants to offer, as long as it's good help, as long as it makes sense, to try and do something about it. Wonderful. Now, the interesting part about Mylan is that they were actually a small part of why there is such a massive problem with opioid addiction in the first place. In fact, back in March of this year, the Senate opened an investigation on 5 different manufacturers to determine what role they had in creating this epidemic. Now, these companies are Purdue Pharma, Johnson & Johnson Janssen Division, Insys, Mylan, and Depomed. In 2016, Mylan apparently ranked as the number 17th supplier of opioids sold in the U.S. Now, that actually represents about 1% of the entire U.S. opioid market. So they're actually not a huge part, but still a part, to be fair. So, yes, I think that, sure, Mylan and Ms. Devlin probably do want to stop the epidemic. I believe that. Now, it's also likely that she wants to advance the interests of the company that she seems to work for. You can do both at the same time. I'm just saying. Now, federal investigators, interestingly enough, found something else on Miss Devlin. Apparently, she was involved in allegations of insider trading against her husband. So, federal investigators had accused 2 men of making trades based on tips about pending mergers between 2008 and 2005 from Matthew Devlin, a former Lehman Brothers Holdings Incorporated broker. Now, investigators say Devlin misappropriated the information by listening to conversations of his wife, Nina, an executive at public relations firm Brunswick Group, LLC, who worked on mergers and assessing her travel schedule. According to documents, Matthew Devlin shared tips with friends about transactions, including Novartis AG purchases of Eon Labs, InBev MV's purchase of Anheuser-Busch, and Electronic Arts' unsolicited bid for Take-Two Interactive. Devlin, however, Nina Devlin, was not implicated in wrongdoing. In fact, she was called the Golden Goose because of the value information that was obtained wrongly for her. So, look, this information, while not exactly damning, isn't great either. Without actually going and relitigating the case, we do have to assume that Miss Devlin was a victim here. And of course, this now is her triumphant return, becoming a part of the Trump FDA, who are already staffed by industry insiders. At worst case, I believe that this is the revolving door in action once again, showing the tight bond between both government and industry, and showing how tight that bond actually is. So, if anything, new swamp, same as the old swamp. A swamp is a swamp is a swamp, and that's unfortunately what we have in the Trump administration. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent progressive media, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/TYTNation.